The people of East Palestine continue to demand answers as distrust grows over the train disaster. Let's bring in today's political panel. With us today, Maura Gillespie, Bluestack Strategies founder and principal and former Speaker John Boehner advisor, and Tim Hogan, Democratic strategist, ARC Initiative senior advisor, and former Amy Klobuchar communications director. Welcome to both of you. Great to have you on set.
Thanks for having us. So
let's start in Ohio. Here is Missouri Republican Senator Eric Schmitt.
He's been a no-show in Ohio, and so the American people are right to be upset about this. They demand answers. They demand a presence by this administration to know that they're going to take care of these issues. But I think it's part and parcel. A lot of these folks who claim to be environmentalists don't care much about the environment. They care about climate alarmism to scare people so they can gather more and more power and control.
Tim, what about Ohio? What about the president and his team's response to it?
Well, I think, first of all, we saw, and thanks to some of the grilling on Fox and Friends, Governor Mike DeWine step up and actually accept some help from HHS, from FEMA, from other federal agencies. There was a question of why that was taking so long. And to Senator Schmitt's point there about environmentalists, we know that part of the problem with rail safety in this country is that in 2014, we put in some new air brake technology requirements for the Federal Railroad Administration. We were using things that were developed during a pre-Civil War era prior to this, and in 2018, the Trump administration rolled back those regulations. So there are serious questions of federal involvement here, but it's also a story about corporate investment in safety and what needs to be done on the federal government side.
Maura, your thoughts on Ohio? Was the president slow to respond? What about Transportation Secretary Buttigieg?
Across the board, I would say Norfolk Southern showed us what not to do when faced with a crisis. And so I think a lot of responsibility and accountability needs to be put there. And when you look at what Secretary Pete has done or not done, half the battle of leadership is showing up. And we didn't see that until 10 days later. We saw a response from Secretary Buttigieg. And I would say that APA Michael Reagan is on the ground and has dedicated and confirmed that he will be there until this mess is cleaned up, which is important.
Sure.
But I do think there is a lack of leadership across the board for Secretary Buttigieg, but also for Norfolk Southern. They haven't taken responsibility, and that should be frustrating to the people of East Palestine, Ohio. They need clean air to breathe and clean water to drink, and that should be the priority, not the politics, the people.
All right, friends, let's shift to foreign policy. And we had the Secretary of State talking about his conversation with his Chinese counterpart. Let's play it.
We had a very direct, very clear conversation about the Chinese surveillance balloon being sent over our territory in violation of our sovereignty, in violation of international law. I told Wang Yi, my Chinese counterpart, that that action was unacceptable and must never happen again. We also had an opportunity to talk about the Russian aggression against Ukraine.
Tim, start us off.
I mean, I think what we're seeing here is what Secretary Blinken said he was going to do when this meeting was scheduled, which is to communicate that this is unacceptable, that it is a violation of sovereignty, that's a violation of international law. Secretary Blinken also noted that China has something like 40-some surveillance spy balloons like this across the country, across the world in other countries. So I think what we are clearly communicating to China, and in how they are talking about Russia and potentially seeing trend lines from the Pentagon that they may be trying to move lethal aid there, are warnings, serious warnings from the United States and Secretary Blinken.
Did Secretary Blinken handle it well? And what about the concerns of not only the Chinese seeing that balloon flying over the United States, but our other adversaries as well?
I think the Secretary did hit the issues that we wanted him to hit as far as concern over Taiwan. Concern over what China has already been doing for decades, which is looking at our vulnerabilities and trying to exploit them. They do it geopolitically, territorially, and otherwise. And we need to confront China, and I think that is an area of bipartisanship and that this government can achieve by addressing the threats and the attacks that China perpetuates upon American soil, but also to our allies, looking at Taiwan. If they're able to flow balloons of surveillance over our country, quickly they'll be able to do that to Taiwan and more. And that's a concern that we also need to really be looking at. They're an ally that we vow to protect, and we need to do so.
We're looking ahead this week to the one-year anniversary of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Any concerns about U.S. involvement, and does there need to be a finite amount of U.S. involvement there?
I think what we are continually seeing, and with President Biden's travel to Poland, is that we continue to take the conflict seriously, and that there is a will on our part to try to make sure that the situation doesn't escalate itself. I think what we're seeing in particular with Secretary Blinken in China, too, is that we have open lines of communication there to make sure that this conflict doesn't escalate, and that's critically important.
Maura, your thoughts as we approach the anniversary?
If China does throw their support behind Russia, that is a huge problem for us, and it should be for our relations, any chance of having diplomatic relations with China. America supports Ukraine because Russia invaded a sovereign nation. We stand with democracy and freedom, and if China throws their support to Russia, they're supporting a war criminal.
Maura Gillespie, Tim Hogan, great job. Thank you so much.